And the way we walk, some people walk with their emotions. Some people are very emotional. People know the way they walk by, they wear their feelings on their sleeves, and some people are just very logical, like Captain Spock. Some people think of this as your bent or your attitude or your integrity and your character. It says a lot about you, the way you walk. Some people walk together. Some people like to walk by themselves. You call those people introverts or mean. Or you have some people that can't stand to be by themselves, so they're constantly around other people, and they're extroverts. And they're not mean. It's just a joke. An inside joke between me and my wife. But our walk says a lot about us. There's a lot of different things in the way others see us and how we're walking out this thing we call life. And everybody's got one. Some of us are not as excited about others of us. Now, Frank always looks fantastic, so we know Frank's life is always amazing. Some of us, we have grief on our face every day, all day, and everybody sees it, and we've got to throw our grief card at everybody every time we see them. We'll let them know that we live in grief. My walk is a grief walk. Some people run around and you can't get the smile off their face, and you wish they'd stop smiling because it makes you sick, that they're happy all the time or they're faking it. And if that's the case, then you can talk to me about stop smiling later. But I smile a lot. I think that every time somebody asks me how I'm doing, it's always outstanding, and that's my minimum, because I get to choose whether I'm happy. You get to choose whether or not you're happy. Life is not a perfect roller coaster. You're going to go through some really, really bad days. And then you're going to go through some worse days, and every now and then you'll get a better day. But days are worth walking through, and they're worth walking through with other people. And our walk really tells a lot about us. It tells us a lot about our hearts, about our spirits. It tells a lot about our past experience, our history. It tells a lot about our associations with other people. And everybody knows that you usually are what you hang out with, right? So if I'm a golfer and I hang out with 20 skateboarders, I'm more likely to become a skateboarder than to stay a golfer. And that's just the way association is. That's the nature of people. It's the nature of the way we walk. So we're going to talk a lot about different walks, and some in particular, like the first one we'll talk about, David, is the way we are taught to walk. Now, the truth is we hardly ever walk how we're taught to walk, even from the very first days that we're able to roll over and get up on our feet and take our first steps. The majority of the reason for this is we always are leaning towards rebellion. Unfortunately, most of you know that this is a side effect of sin. We have a daily perspective that is usually very self-centered or very bent toward not acting right, not doing right. The first thing I remember all 5 of my sons named David, and I'm going to tell you all the story about it because I was requested to tonight. So all 5 of my sons are named David, and every time that they walked for the first time, I would say, "Come here," and they would laugh and take off. That always really bothered me. I was like, "You're going to do what I say." Just because my father always said I had to do what he said. But it's very interesting that human nature, that flesh nature always leans first toward rebellion. So we're often taught the correct things. You can go to the next slide. Or you can go back. I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself. I'm not real good at this. This is my first time. That's a lie. It's really not. Rebellion is a resistance towards authority or control or convention. Now, control is usually the biggest thing here. We believe that what we're taught is meant to control us, and nobody wants to be controlled. So we rebel against that. We have this nature that we don't want anybody telling us when, where, how, what to do or say. That's why marriage is so difficult, because we constantly tell each other what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. But marriage is so worthwhile, just like walking, life is worthwhile. But we really don't want this control in our lives, or we don't want the convention of having to do things just because there's a process or an order to things. But our very act of rebellion in itself leads us right to the very thing we're trying to stay away from. Our rebellion lets our sin nature control us. It lets it harness us and bind us up, and it keeps us pent against this fight where we're always trying to have a better life or lead a better life or walk a better walk or a straighter walk or a narrower path. All these different ideas or perspectives that people have. People communicate in so many different ways. It's always interesting when you talk to somebody who's got a bent towards being very logical, and then you have another person who's very bent towards being abstract. Those are interesting conversations to have, and you're rarely on the same page. But that act of rebellion leads you to being controlled by your own flesh. And it reminded me of the story, probably one of my favorite stories, about the prodigal son. I can remember being about 4 or 5 years old, and I got the very first book I ever got was The Prodigal Son. And that's in Luke chapter 15, if anybody's keeping me honest. I might have made that up, but I doubt it. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But it's very interesting because you have a man who's obviously wealthy, and he has a large manor, a large household, and he has many possessions. And he's got 2 sons, and one of his sons didn't want to stick around really. He wanted his inheritance, and he wanted to get on down, do what he wanted to do, right? It was that bent of rebellion. He wanted to do his own thing. And so his father's like, okay, I'll split what I have between you. And he decides to take off. He runs off. He spends all his money in another land. And then a famine comes. And when the famine comes, the kid starts to get hungry because he blew all his money on alcohol and drugs and hanging out with anybody that wanted to be a friend to somebody who had money. Who's familiar with that? When you have money, everybody wants to be your friend? When you're dirt poor, you drive a 12-passenger child abduction van? No, I'm just playing. Nobody wants to be your friend. I'm just playing. Everybody wants to be your friend when you're the one buying the rounds. Everybody wants to be your friend when you're the one that's on top or when you have. And so he found himself in that kind of situation. He had a whole bunch of friends, and then all of a sudden he had nothing. And he attached himself to a man who had some means, and the man put him out feeding the pigs. And so he's out there feeding the pigs, and he'd just as soon as eat what they were eating because the guy was starving to death. And then he goes thinking to himself, because we all think to ourselves, right? Am I moving around for too much? My brother, is this bright and shiny, blinding everybody? He says, man, I wonder how many of my father's servants have plenty of food. They got plenty of bread left over. So maybe I'd go back home and just beg my father to let me be one of his servants. At least then I'd have a full belly. So everybody knows the story, right? He goes back home. His father sees him. They throw a big party. The older brother gets really upset because he's been doing everything right. And, the prodigal son walks out a very familiar perspective of a lot of people in life that, they wanted to do their own thing. And we're going to elaborate on this in a little bit. But I wanted y'all to have that story in your mind thinking about this prodigal son, because this prodigal son is not a bad person. He may be ignorant at some point, or he may be maybe just led astray by his own thought processes. Maybe he thought life was just a joke or it was easy. Some of us grew up and we were the baby of the family, and everybody took care of us when things were down or when you messed up, and they took care of you. That happened to be my story. I had 3 older brothers and an older sister who happens to be the meanest woman in the world. And I love you, sis. And, they were always looking after me. I was the baby by 10 years or so I had to grow up listening to REO Speedwagon and Journey and all that stuff, if that dates anything for you, or dates some of you guys. But they always took care of every time I messed up. If I blew my money by going out, then needed gas money to get to work, I always had 3 brothers to go to, or a sister. And then as I started nearing 25 years old, and that started getting tiresome of Mike always being the needy one, I got married, and then the expectation was different. It was expected that I would be responsible and accountable and reliable and on point and a man of my word and all these things that I lied when I said what I said to get her, which was I'd be a good spiritual leader of a household. I never thought God would make me own up to that. So before we go on, I'm going to tell you a real quick story. I'm going to take a rabbit trail and tell you about my 5 sons named David. When I was 6 years old, I had a father who retired military and a great man, a man of honor, but he was a physical man. And one night when I was 6 years old, I'd just gotten saved at Tabernacle Baptist right here in Hickory, or down the road in Hickory, and come home that night, and it was a real rough and rowdy night, and everybody was getting a little bit of the whoop. And I walked outside and I said, God, if you'll give me a son born on my birthday, I'll name him after King David. And I promise to be a better father than my father. Now, that's not a condemnation of my father. My father did the best with what he had, the best way he knew how. And I think most fathers do that, and I intend to do that. And I hope my sons, when they have children, will do that. But 20 years later, I met a beautiful woman who we were told it would be very difficult for us to have children. My wife had cysts on her ovaries, and her chemicals in her baby-making parts, stuff didn't work right. And so 2 years into the marriage, we ended up having our first son. Neither one of us had a job, so neither one of us had insurance. She wakes me up at 5 o'clock in the morning and says, take me to the hospital, I'm dying. Like, well, I don't have any insurance on you. No life insurance. I guess I'll take you. We get there. Call it our $500 pregnancy test, because we get there and the doctor says, well, we got to take her back for x-rays. Don't throw a shoe at me. I'm not President Bush. So doctor says, we got to take x-rays. And I said, no, what if she's pregnant? And she kind of looked at me like, you're a lunatic. The doctor says, well, we'll have to test her real quick. So they test her, and they came back in the room, and the doctor just said it all nonchalant. He comes back in, he says, you're tested positive for pregnancy, and he walked back out. I just winked at her like I knew everything was cool, you know. And from then on, she thought I was somebody. But our first son ended up being born on my birthday, and I figured if God was faithful, I would be faithful, so I named all of my children David. So everybody knows why we have 5 Davids. I used to tell everybody I had 1 David and 3 Chinese kids, Lily and Mai. And now I have an Ethan, and I couldn't figure out the 4th one, so now I just tell everybody I got 5 sons named David. But they're beautiful sons, and they're gifts from the Lord. They're a heritage, and these sons are worth coming home to and walking through this life every day for. My wife is worth walking through every day with, regardless of what times come along, regardless of how good the days are, how bad the days are, regardless of how much grief we give each other or how much grief we find in the world. Life's tough, gang. Life is tough. On a daily basis, there are points where we sit down in a chair, or we walk out to our vehicle, or we put our feet on the ground first thing in the morning and we think, man, you know, these points happen. I know they happen because I walk through life every day, and I talk to people. And what's always astonished me about people, especially in a work environment, is they always complain. I've never worked at a job where everybody didn't hate that job. And I thought, man, bosses must really be horrible. Till I became one. And then I know I'm horrible because I give everybody a hard time. But it's funny how we always complain about everything in life, and that becomes part of our walk, is that we don't like that we have more than 90% of the world. We don't like the fact that we don't have to walk a mile or go out to the woods to use the restroom. We don't have dirt, mud floors. We don't like the fact that we have 2 fireplaces in our house, or we have to get wood for them, or whatever it is, the way we live and walk. I thought that was very interesting when John told the story about the guy that says, do you guys worship your plates? You know, you build houses for your dishes, you know. It's very interesting. But anyway, we'll go a little further on to the next slide. And the thing about this rebellion nature is that we always want to walk our own way. And I thought I threw that out of my pocket. I came up with some beautiful pictures, but I stayed away from movies this time because every time I've referenced a movie, nobody in here has seen it. So everybody's seen somebody walking. We always want to walk our own way. We see somebody else do something, or they try to teach us how to do something, and we don't have to get taught. We're ready to take off. And a lot of that has something to do with youth maybe, because I remember being that way. My kids are that way. And there's something funny about always taking off and wanting to forge your own path or forge your own way, like this guy here is doing. He's rolling out this road in front of himself, and he's really putting a lot of effort into pushing that. But, a lot of times just walking your own way and forging your own path can lead to falling, because you took off half-cocked or half-prepared, or only knowing partially the way to go. And every teenager does this when they launch off into life, right? They don't have half a clue, and they think they know everything. So they're going out, and they have to work 10 times harder than somebody who actually got taught the right way to do anything, because being taught the right way is a lot of times simple. But these falls, these times where we bump our knee, or we don't get our vehicle inspected because we didn't think enough about talking to the guy about why it didn't pass inspection, and then we get kind of scared, and then we end up letting our tag lapse. And these are just small things that happen in life, but those things are falls, right? Those things cause hurts, because you get a ticket and it costs you $150. And if you're not slick enough to walk up to the DA's office and tell them that the cop told you if you come back up there that they drop it, then you end up having to pay for it. Or you get a lawyer for everybody else who's needing to do things. But these hurts often lead to scars. We're going to talk a little bit about scars. But falling, we're not there yet. Falling is always a reference to sin in our lives. When we sin, we fall. There's always a consequence to this, every time. I mean, even the smallest ones. I've tested it. I've tested out, and every time I end up paying a price. And the hurts are the consequences, right? And then the scars end up being our reminders. There's a difference once you've been taught and you're innovative. When I talk about walking your own way, if somebody's taught you something from front to back and you know it, and then you decide to innovate on that, that's different. But when you're just going off that natural rebellious stage and you go off, it's a different perspective. That leads to these things that we're talking about, hurt and these scars. The scars are funny things. I had a scar when I was a little infant. I had a hernia. Has anybody had a hernia? I don't remember how mine felt, because I was only about 2 months old. Anyway, they go in and they sew your intestines, where your intestines basically pushing through the muscle wall, right? And so every time a baby cries, they get a little bump on their stomach, and usually this happens either in sports or in little babies. But my scar now that I'm adult is about that big, but it's not a big deal, other than it's just real hard in there, and it's it's that tissue that protects that site where there was the hurt, right? It's the reminder. Well, where it becomes a big deal is, when I was in my 20s, I went to the doctor, and he told me I had a stomach virus, and 48 hours later, after seeing a light in my stomach, I went back to the doctor. He told me, oh yeah, your appendix ruptured 2 days ago. So now I got a really big scar that goes all the way across my belly. But these scars tend to do this. And I wish I could have a really cool cross story behind that, but I don't. But there's an interesting thing about these two scars as the way they become my reminders, because I do not sit for very long periods of time, because my scars remind me that this does not feel good. It's not fun to sit down or wear belts or anything like that, but in my profession I wear button-up shirts, so I'm dress pants or cargos, and I wear belts. So these scars are reminders, and they can hurt. They can hurt a lot. We'll go on to the next slide, David. Scars often affect our walk a great deal because they continue to hurt after the wound is gone. Scars can be very terrible for our relationships. And I'm not just talking about marriage, I'm talking about our relationships with everybody. These painful reminders restrict our lives. They restrict our movements. They restrict our interactions. They restrict the health of our relationships with people. And because I am married, it's the easiest thing for me to reference. A lot of you have been married, or at some point you're going to be married if you don't fall asleep during the middle of this, Josh. And these relationships are dependent upon how we choose to walk life, because somebody else now becomes one with us in life, and the way we walk affects the way they walk. I can't remember the name of that movie. I promise to stay away from movies. Never mind. All right. So when the two guys are attached to each other, you know what movie I'm talking about? You know, one of them wants to go this way, the other wants to go that way. If you date a girl, it's too bad for the other guy. But our relationships, the way we interact with each other, really depend on how we've walked through life. And our partner, our person that we're walking with, really relies on us to be their strength. Really relies on us to be their help or their encouragement or their backbone in some cases, because some people are brave and some people are not. Some people are very quick-tempered and some people are not. And God pairs us really well sometimes. I know He paired me and my wife really well. And the way we've walked life really sometimes conflicts, and we grind against each other, right? It's kind of like two bricks. You throw them in a dryer and see what you get after it's done. You get a whole bunch of dust and two balls. And when we walk through life, we really chip each other a lot with the way we walk. And these scars, as they relate to our relationships, we'll go on to the next slide, David, is, got ahead of myself again. These scars and the way that we relate to each other and the way we walk out our lives with each other, our scars can really keep us from interacting with each other in a healthy way, because my scars can give me a very quick response anytime somebody says something inappropriate to me, and that's bad for a relationship. Somebody else's scar might cause them to always they shut down immediately and they don't want to talk about anything ever. Has anybody been in a relationship like that? Every one of you walk a relationship like this, I guarantee it. But anyway, we'll move on past the scars. Scars are cool. My kid's got a scar on his eye. Chicks dig scars. But how do we walk? The way we told. When we're told to walk a certain way, we usually hear the do as I do, or do as I say, not as I do, right? Anybody remember this when you were kids? Your parents were either, I won't be too politically correct here, they were smoking weed or smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol, and you weren't allowed to touch any of that, but you saw them doing it whenever or wherever, however. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I tell my kids to be quiet or I'm snatching that spine out. But when people tell you, or you walk by the way you're told, there's a lot of hypocrisy in what we're told in life. There's a lot of hypocrisy in a business sense or in relationships, or we're growing up parents and children, and when you're just told something. And when you're walking out what you're told, it leads to distrust. Because hypocrisy, always from a kid's perspective, kid sees this coming a mile away, right? Because they're like, this is ridiculous. You're going to do whatever you want to do, but I've got to watch what I do. And that tends to raise some kids that have distrust issues. It leads to people being cynical. Being cynical leads to premature judgment of people. We discount others too early. And it's not good for relationships. Anybody picked up, every time I speak, it's always about relationships, right? Let me tell you why. Because I either have a relationship with my wife, or I have a relationship with you, or I have a relationship with God, and sometimes I have all three. But we're not going to walk through life without relationships. Now you can choose to walk in these relationships, or you can choose to be a donkey, right? Donkeys in this story are not good things. Okay. The way we see. We do what we want because we see others do what they want to do, right? You grow up and you're living in a mafia family and they're killing, taking whatever they want, then you kind of grow up thinking you can do whatever you want. Or you live in a household where everything's so perfectly religious that you're not allowed to say anything out of the way, and you got to be perfect in every step you take. Then you hit life and it's a party and you take off and you just do whatever you want to do. Or, and what I want to talk about a little more, maybe not tactfully but sharply, is that we see obstacles in our way and we become gripped by fear. And this is something when we talk about in our lives, we walk, we make decisions, we interact with other people based off of everything that comes through these two portals. If you only have one, then there's one portal. And for those of you who have four, you're four portals. My wife has four eyes. But in the reference to when in Rome, do as the Romans do, that's when you see people doing things that they're not supposed to, and then you say, hey, it looks like the easy way to do it, I'll just take what I want. But this fear thing is something really to be grappled with, because fear really does some amazing things to us. When you see your circumstances in life, and this is mainly what we'll talk a little bit about tonight, your circumstances always cause a fear reaction in your life. When you have a flat tire, you have a fear response. When you can't pay a bill, you have a fear response. When you're late to work, you have a fear response. When you have to do something on your way home and you want to get home to check your baseball scores, there's a fear response. When Green Bay is not good enough to beat the Dolphins, there's a fear response, even though it's going to be a really long time before that ever happens. It will happen one day. The Dolphins will win a game. But everything in life produces a fear response. And we're very fearful creatures. Now, even the best of us, I mean, Dale here, who I call Dad, guy's the baddest dude I know. He could beat anybody I know in arm wrestling because he carries 800-pound granite slabs around all day. And he's a very strong, macho, man's kind of man. And, he has fears in his life. Everybody has fears in their life. Some people fear stinky feet. Some people fear bad hair. Obviously not this guy. But we have a lot of things in life that we fear, and fear causes some really ridiculous actions. Go on to the next slide, David. Fear stifles our walk. It stifles our relationships, and it stifles our growth. When we're so afraid of things and we spend so much time thinking about what the next hour or the next day is going to bring, or the next argument, or the next whatever it is, the next paycheck when you don't have enough. And believe me, I know what those days are like too. But this fear really keeps us in this box. I chose this picture of this kid not because it gave me, it evoked ideas of maybe him being beaten or, somehow treated horribly. But there are some very simple things in life that make us do this. There are some really ignorant things that we walk through, and we make them out to be these big, gigantic tsunamis in life, and they're really not. And they produce some really crazy responses in our lives. They cause us to make bad decisions, it leads to poor judgment, and it leads to us feeling lost or hopeless. Let's go to the next slide, David. How should we walk? This is pretty interesting because I believe we ought to walk the way we're called to walk. Right? All other walks in life, if you're not going by the way you're called to walk, all other walks are based on your flesh. They're based off this physical sin nature flesh. All the walks we have, if they're not based on the Word, if they're not based on a relationship with God, are based in our natural senses, and our natural senses betray us all the time. Because number one, there's nobody that can lie to you any better than you can. There is nobody that can justify the worst things in your life better than you can justify. And some of us have walked through life justifying quite a lot of things. Some of us have walked through life and we've lied not only to everybody else, but we've lied to ourselves so much that we're confused. We don't even know how to act or what to do. And people can see that. People see our walks. People know us by our walks. Our walks sometimes precede us. Other people meet us, oh, you're that guy. Oh, you're that lady. Oh, you're Michael McDaniel. Yeah, I heard about you. But when you walk the way you're called to walk, this very next verse explains this for us. For we walk by faith and not by sight. It's 2 Corinthians 5:7. What's really interesting about this is probably the oddest explanation of this verse you've ever heard, maybe, or quite possibly. I'm just the strangest guy you know. But the Word tells us about our calling. The Word constantly reinforces how God's called us to walk. And God gave us a very clear perspective. We walk by faith, not by sight. In other words, we're supposed to walk the way we're called. But instead, we always want to close our ears and we want to walk by what we see. what we feel, or our emotions. Emotions are really bad things, by the way. It's not what we see, but what we hope for in life that really matters in the way that we walk. Yes, ma'am. We're called to walk in a way where we lay down our flesh, where we lay down these senses, right? We lay down these things that lead us the wrong way and lie to us, or our flesh constantly calls us to do the wrong things because we crave an unrighteous lifestyle. Our bodies, we weren't designed this way by God, but the fall, the sin nature leads to death. It leads to this desire for things that lead to death. We constantly seek after these things even when we don't want to, because it's just our natural bent. But when we walk by faith, faith is a complete trust and confidence. That's something you can't have in yourself because you don't even know how you're going to react to most times. Nobody knows the depths of their own heart. That's why we can't judge other people, by the way, because we can't even know the depth of our heart, much less the depth of somebody else's heart. Observation is definitely not judgment, like when you're reading your phone instead of listening. Complete trust and confidence in the Word is what faith is. Complete trust in a loving and righteous God is what faith is. It's a complete trust and confidence that He will help you walk, that He will keep you from falling, that He will protect you even when you can't protect yourself. He'll protect you even when others want to hurt you. But we talk about how to walk. Let's go to the next slide, David. It should be slide 10, right? We walk in a manner that's pleasing to the Lord. This is completely opposite of our natural bent, right? Because the Lord says we can be holy because He's holy. He calls us to be righteous. He calls us to be saints. These are things that none of us feel like we're worthy of this stuff. But He still called us for a reason. And we'll get to a point where that's going to make a little sense for you. But on the onset, it just doesn't make any sense when God calls us in a manner to be pleasing to Him. But He wants us to be a sweet savor, a sweet smell to Him. He wants our walks to be edifying of Him. He wants us to glorify Him and honor Him with what we say and what we do and how we act. And this is our walk. We're no longer supposed to live for ourselves. And this is really the hardest thing that you can do. This is a really difficult process because every decision you make in life, even when you go home and you wash the dishes for your wife, you didn't really do it for her. In the back of your mind, you're thinking, if I wash the dishes for her, she'll be nice tomorrow. And you know that ain't true. My wife is. My wife's always nice. My sweetest lady in the world. My wife makes me a better person. The Lord makes me a better person. But we're no longer living for ourselves. If we choose to walk by faith and not by sight, we have to lay this flesh nature down. We have to give that trust and that confidence in the Lord to help us walk, to guide us. It says everything that we see is held up by things we don't see, and everything we don't see is God. Right? That spirit nature. All we see is this fleshly stuff, and this is really a small piece of it. What's very interesting, and maybe this is way outside the scope, or maybe it's another rabbit trail, time, space, the universe, all that stuff is just this little bitty ball, and God's outside of all that stuff. He created it. That's why this may be out of the book of Mike, or just my opinion. He says a day is 1,000 years, is 1,000 years is a day. Because he's sitting there, he's holding it, he's seeing front to back. Right? What takes 1,000 years for us, for him, you know? But there's some things in your life that's felt like 1,000 years when it was only a day. But God's perspective of time and our perspective of time are totally different and not dependent on each other. But that was a rabbit trail. But we're living for the one who died for us is what God's called us to do. Let's go to the next slide, David. This is 2 Corinthians 5:9. Therefore we make it our aim, whether present or absent, to be pleasing to Him. Now, I really challenge you guys to go read this whole chapter, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, or at least through like verse 15 or 20 or whatever. But I thought it was really amazing that when God calls us to walk by faith and not by sight, that they're talking about making it their aim. So you lay down your flesh and you make it your aim to walk a life pleasing to the Lord. Now, these things really lead to something that's very miraculous in our life. It's not magic, it's not anything like that. But when we aim to please Him no matter where we are, no matter what our circumstances in life, then we can't be going by what we see, because what we see is always going to give us a fear response. But if we're trusting in Him and we're following after Him, and we've made it our aim to lay down our flesh and to walk after the Lord, and when it's talking about to be present or absent, it's talking about being present in His side or being absent from your body, right? And you read the rest of that. There's some other deeper things in here, and I'm not real deep. We're in a bathtub, not an ocean, with when I'm talking, okay? But no matter what the circumstances in our life, if we keep our eyes on Him, right? Keep our eyes on the kingdom, and everything else will be taken care of. We'll go to the next slide. For the love of Christ compels us, because we judge thus, that if one died for all, then all died. What really caught me here is this compelling. When we talk about having a relationship with the Lord, talking about having faith in Him. In other words, you believe that He died and resurrected for your sins, right? So you have this faith, you have this relationship with the Lord because you know what He did for you. And that compelling drives us. And it's funny because this word compels means to drive or to control. It controls us. And it's funny because it's something that our flesh nature doesn't like. It doesn't like control. It always perceives control as something negative for us. You can't control me. You can't tell me what to do. You can't judge me. Well, God can. God's holy and He's righteous. But if you allow Him to control you, you allow Him to control your decisions, you allow Him to control your walk, He will lead you through some very amazing things. He will lead you through life with life instead of you walking through life in a sin and defeated nature. But anyway, it controls us to be obedient. Now we'll go on to the next slide, and right here is what we talk about faith. Is this slide 13, David? Yes. In this 2 Corinthians 5:15, and He died for all, that those who live should live no longer for themselves, but for Him who died for them and rose again. This is where our faith comes in, if we believe this, right? For God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth on Him should not perish but have everlasting life. But to walk by faith gives us life. But when we walk by sight, it leads us to death. Because the wages of sin are. And we're walking by this, we're walking in our natural. And our natural will never lead to life. When there was sin in the Garden of Eden, and then there was the curse, every generation of everything, man, animals, plants, everything, the nature of the earth itself, is in a state of decay. Every generation gets weaker. We look at athletes today and say, oh, these are the biggest, strongest, fastest guys there ever been. That's not true. Empirical science proves and shows us that our bones are getting brittler, our muscles are getting weaker, our connective tissues are not what they used to be. That's why pitchers blow their arms out every other day now. That's why football players blow their knees out every other day. It's just, we're in a fallen state. We're in a fallen world. But our faith is placed on God who is not fallen. Our faith is placed in God who can take us out of a fallen state, who can control our walk and lead us to eternal life with Him. Not an eternal separation. But trust in God and not in self. We'll go on to the next slide. Why does it matter? If we walk by the flesh, we're bound to those things that control it, and that is sin and death. And sin and death gives us despair. But if we walk by faith, we walk by the Spirit, we're free from sin and death, and we walk in life. We can walk in freedom from sin. We can walk in life knowing that we have a future hope. And Christ is our hope. An eternal relationship with a loving God and His light and His love is really something amazing to know you have. And that's why it matters. Because when we walk in these relationships I was talking about earlier, all of us are in relationships one way or another. Some of us are really bad at it. Some of you guys may be really good at it, but I don't know many who are. Even the best of the best of the best are really sometimes very poor at relationships because they have a very self-centered perspective, just because it's their natural bent. It's their natural walk. But this promise is not magic. This promise of, I might be on slide 15 now, David. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And this is the hope I was talking about. Because when things become new in your life, and those scars are gone, and those hurts are no longer a part of your decision process, because you're living by a faith now. You're living by a hope that no matter what your eyes see, you're not bound to that. That no matter what your experience tells you, you're not bound to that. Because there are things when I'm walking through life and I see some really stinky things coming my way in life, I can either really buckle down and say, okay, we're about to come in for a crash landing. This is really going to suck. Am I allowed to say that on camera? Y'all, it's not a church, is it? That's right, it's a warehouse. We're coming in for a crash landing. Or I can say, you know what? I have a relationship with Almighty God. Do what He wants to do, when He wants to do it, how He wants to do it. If He chooses me to save me from this, just like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're going in the furnace. God can choose to save me if He wants to, but if He doesn't, I'll die for His glory. It's fine with me. Either way, but I have a hope. I have an eternal hope. I don't have to keep my eyes so focused on this walk and this world and these consequences and these things in life that keep me constantly confused. Because we have a daily battle that we wake up to, and we have to sleep at night. Some of you aren't any good at sleeping either. We have to sleep at night, but the enemy doesn't. The enemy's waiting to punch you in the mouth in the morning because he knows if he can punch you early and fast enough, he's got you reeling all day long. The rest of the day, you spend your day, you're focused on anything but God, no matter how hard you try. Why? Because you get sucker punched in the mouth every morning. Some of us live lives like this. As soon as we wake up, we're either dealing with that hangover or we're dealing with that attitude we gave our spouse because we decided that we had a bad week at work. And, Satan loves to punch us in the mouth, and he doesn't sleep. He's prepared. He's got this hierarchy of minions and spirits and principalities that are really just looking to make your day bad. And there's a reason, because he doesn't have a hope. There's a reason the Word says that he walks around looking to steal, kill, and destroy. Because he doesn't want you to have a hope, because he knows he doesn't have a hope. I'm telling you right now, I've lived my life, and I've got 5 sons named David because I know a God who's faithful. I know a God who can bring us through things and give us things that we're told we couldn't have. Doctors tried to encourage us to abort our first son more than once. That's just funny because we're walking through this life. We're told we can't have children. So if we're paying attention to our circumstances, then we'll say, okay, doctor, you know best. And I lose my promise. I've been waiting since I was 6 years old for this promise. And I'm telling you, I was seriously waiting. I knew it was coming. I knew even when we were getting married, hey, you can't have kids. That's fine. I'll marry you anyway because I see my kids only in your eyes. Because I know God can do what He wants to do. But it was a scary thing. When you test positive for baby being maybe spina bifida, and they say, well, we recommend you have an abortion. And I say, no, God's got our baby in our hands, so we're not going to do that. You just turn around and tell the doctor that and tell him to have a good day. And we did. What's very interesting about that is my first son was born in two amniotic sacs. So what's very interesting about that is very early, if there are twins, and maybe, how the little cells replicate, maybe one of them doesn't replicate so well, the other one just absorb it, right? And then it'll grow and it'll have 2 amniotic sacs, and those often test positive for spina bifida. It's very amazing how maybe millions of babies are aborted or die because some doctor had this false positive test, or because somebody was walking by their sight, not by their faith. But I'm not a perfect guy. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a good preacher. I'm not anything. What I am is I'm a sinner just like everybody else. What I am is somebody who walks life and I'm really bad at it. What I am is somebody who needs a God to save him. What I am is somebody who needs a Christ that loved him enough to die for him. What I am is somebody who loves each one of you guys enough to tell you the truth about life, that sin is sin and righteousness is righteousness. And you can't mix the two. Dark and light have absolutely nothing to do with each other. You can justify what you want to justify, but you end up paying the consequences anyway. Many people get stuck here. Lot's wife got stuck here, right? She was getting saved from the city, but she had to turn around and look at her mess one last time. The same thing happens to us. We're in Christ. We're a new creation. The old things passed away. Behold, all things have become new. We get really excited. We got this new, fresh start. We feel like we've started the slate clean. And then we see somebody we haven't seen in a while, and they want to take us back to the good old days. They want to turn us around, or they want to condemn you and say, you ain't changed. I know who you are. I remember me and you, we partied pretty hard. There ain't no way you've changed. You were the worst of the worst. People want to remind you of your past, but God always wants to remind you of your hope. God always wants to remind you of the future you have with him. There are a lot of other words that people want to use, or a lot of other ways the enemy wants to use to steal this message from you. He wants to steal this hope from you. He wants to steal this relationship with you. He wants to stifle you. He wants to keep you in fear. He wants to keep you in bondage to your flesh nature, because he knows that it's going to lead to your death. He knows it's going to lead to an eternal separation from you and God. Don't let others take your focus away. Don't let others change the way you look at everything. Don't let others take away the word that God's planted in your heart tonight. That you can walk by faith and not by sight. You can have a hope. When times are new, or when things are new and hurts are gone and there are no more scars, relationships can breathe and we no longer fear what we see. And I love this picture. With no fear, we can walk with lions. Everybody believe that? Everybody believe that? I don't care what you're walking through this week, or what you walked through last month, or when somebody tells you you can't speak a full 45 minutes. If you don't have any fear, you can walk with lions. And I'm checking my baseball scores in 32 seconds.